Welcome to the Evolution Show. I'm Johan Landgren. If you're new to the show, I'm a full-time investor and writer in sustainable tech. And on the Evolution Show, we bring inspiration to talk about smart energy solutions, electric transports, AI, and inspiration for sustainable living. And today, I have a really inspiring guest for you, the eco-warrior, changemaker, and environmental advisor, Pella Thiel. Pella Thiel is a leader on many fronts, which I think you will notice in this episode. And today we will talk about the pioneering work she is doing to establish legal rights for nature. And we will also talk about what is called Ecocide Law, which we'll come back to in the next episode when Pella will be back on the show. I hope you like the content, and if you want to support the show, we really appreciate a thumbs up and consider subscribing. As always, stay ahead of the curve and stay electric. This is the Evolution Show. Welcome to the Evolution Show, Pella Thiel.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Great to be here.
you're one of the founders of Transtion Sweden, which is part of the global transition network that works for a transition to a fossil-free economy and to build resilient local economies. And for me, this is extra exciting because the transition network has grown a lot over the 10 years I have followed it. And many people I've met through the years have taught me a lot of things and actually inspired me and my friend Robert to write a book about going fossil-free with a focus on Sweden and building a resilient economy. So I'm quite familiar with what you have done, and I think it's really exciting to talk about this and hear what your perspectives on this. So perhaps we can start there. And how did you become involved in the Transition Network? And perhaps you can tell us a bit about the Transition Network for people not familiar about it.
Yeah, okay. So the Transition Network is mainly focusing on actually the change processes that we have to be in now, which is a transition from a very resource-intensive economy where we also are largely separated from the living systems we are a part of. So we don't see that we use a lot of resources. And some of us in like where we are living here in Sweden, we are dependent on a lot of resources from other parts of the world that we can't take the responsibility for our own consumption. So we want to bring that back to where people are, and that we can have a relationship to our own needs and our own places, building local resilience, as you said. And for me, one attractive and particular aspect of the transition movement is also that we think that in order to make that transition of structures and systems in society, we have to also make an inner transition in how we view the world and how we perceive ourselves in it and our values. And for me, I had been involved in the environmental movement quite intensely for 10 years or so, and grown increasingly frustrated over the solutions that we were working for and that was presented, because I didn't see they weren't on the same level as the challenges that we face. So in an inherently unsustainable society, we were proposing solutions that would solve one part of a problem somewhere, but we were still heading for collapse. So I wasn't aware of that at the moment, but what I was looking for was an idea around the systems transformation, like a more systemic approach to solving these crises that we are in. And that's what I found when I came in contact with the transition movement, first actually in the US, when I met the person there and bought the transition handbook, which had just come out, written by Rob Hopkins, one of the co-founders of Transition Network. And this was in 2008. And then I went to some people from the first transition town in Totnes in England came to Sweden and hosted a course in transition. And I went to that course and I was just really deeply moved by it, and also in a way found my own my own deep motivation and my own deep love for people and the world and things that are beautiful. And I just thought, this is what I have to devote my life to. That's what
Yeah,
I have done.
and you are truly dedicated to many issues on many fronts, I think, within the environmental world, so to speak. And you are also a chairperson for Ecocide, which is a Swedish version of the international network Stop Ecocide, if I understand it correctly. And your work to spread the idea of an international so-called ecocide legislation to protect nature or entities in nature, such as rivers, forests, and mountains, for example. And you raise awareness and push for the creation of such laws with Swedish businesses and universities, where you also hold guest lectures about this, to talk about Ecocide Law. And you have also been quite frequently in media in the last couple of years. And you have received the prestigious award, Environmental Hero of the Year, by the from the king, from the World Wildlife Foundation, and handed out by the king, Swedish king. So that's great, I think. I mean, we need attention, and that's, I think, was great that you got it. But for those unfamiliar with an ecocide law, and could you share the idea behind it and tell us perhaps some examples or where it's already in place?
Yeah, so it isn't in place yet, because what we are talking about when we're talking about ecocide as an international crime is exactly what the word sort of says in itself, that it's on the same level as genocide, but for nature. So what we are working for is that ecocide should be a crime within the International Criminal Court in The Hague, where the crimes of grave concern to the whole international community can be prosecuted. And those are at the moment 4. So genocide, war crimes, crimes of aggression, and crimes against humanity. And we believe that there should be a 5th crime among those. They are called also crimes against peace, and that we need a 5th crime, which is ecocide. And this is something I've been working with the last 8 years or so, and it has been a fairly low key, like just a proposal basically that hasn't received so much attention until last year. 2020 was really a pivotal year for this idea, when it got a lot of traction, a lot of attention from people like the Pope and several governments and heads of state, and also businesses. And so it suddenly is talked about. And just last week, there was a definition of ecocide as a crime within the ICC proposed by our organization, Stop Ecocide Foundation. And they had gathered a panel of really top-level international lawyers with huge experience, who has been working for 6 months to craft the definition of ecocide as a crime. And I should have it in front of me, but I don't. And actually that was on the request from 2 Swedish parliamentarians. So there are really interesting Swedish connections also to this idea. Also Olof Palme, the Swedish Prime Minister, who gathered the world for the first time to an international conference on the environment back in 1972, the Stockholm Conference. He was one of the first people to mention the word ecocide. So it has got a long history. And also, actually, when the Rome Statute, which is the regulating document behind ICC in The Hague, when that was negotiated, crimes against nature was actually part of it, but it was taken out. And well, you can sort of understand why that happened. But now we see also the effect that large-scale damage and destruction of nature is legal, and that has to stop.
When I was preparing this conversation, I kept thinking of my favorite book, one of my favorite books by the American writer John Michael Greer. He's written a book called The Wealth of Nature: Economics as if Survival Mattered, which I think is a great title. But the main theme of the book is why humanity needs to reinvent itself and realize that the primary economy, like you are very well aware, is nature. And that everything we think we create with our genius as humans is in fact derived directly or indirectly from nature, while the services we create is in the secondary economy, and that is born from resources we extract from nature. So humans must step away from the illusion that we are the masters of nature. And once we realize this, we can start living in balance with nature and understand that with finite resources we always have to give back. I mean, it feels like common sense, but for most people the connection with nature is lost, and that's something I think you are talking a lot about, how we can bridge that gap back, because maybe Ecocide Law could be that one of those bridges. I don't know what you think. I mean, we need to create a new norm. For most people, they live in urban areas and so on. They don't get in touch with nature, and they don't see the damage, and they don't see, the well-being that could be created. They could feel much better and so on, just being close to nature. So, do you see the protection of nature with ecocide laws as a way to get back in touch with nature, and perhaps step by step for people to realize how dependent we are on this balance with nature that we seem to have lost?
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, that is what I see as the most powerful thing of ecocide law, by putting it side by side with the crimes against humanity and genocide, is also to say that actually, our human rights, our human well-being is totally dependent on the well-being of the living systems we are a part of. And this is, I think, to us as individuals, this is totally understandable and natural. I mean, children know that we need to take care of nature. But the problem is that our systems, they don't know that. So our economic systems, our political systems, our legal systems are unaware. They cannot handle nature as a system that we are a part of, because they were constructed from another mindset. And so, for example, if we go back to 1972, when the world gathered for the first time to say, okay, we have a problem, that we have pollution that is serious, is threatening human health, and it's crossing national boundaries. And so we need to discuss it together. But at that time, I mean, the economy today, 50 years later, is a totally different story. It's a global economy where the players, the most powerful organizations in the world actually, are corporations, which are transnational. And there are no regulations. It's basically a cowboy economy. It's totally unregulated. And we can't have that. So organizations with so much power and that are actually now destructive, they have to obey laws that protect what is of most essential value, as you say. I mean, it's the primary source of everything, actually.
If we just take a step back for people to understand, how did we end up here? I think it's important before we address the solutions. I listened to an interview when you were talking in my friend's Hannes Anagrius Swedish pod, Tillväxtparadigmet, or the growth paradigm, and you talked about two things. I think the fossil fuel consumption or extraction as one, and the second one was the Western culture of dominating, nature, that the perception that we are the masters of the nature, not just a part of it. So perhaps you can just briefly explain for people who are not so familiar with I mean, people might not really understand why we ended up here, and if they do, perhaps it's easier also to move forward.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think it's really interesting. I'm an ecologist, so I think a lot about nature and how it works and what happens in nature and so forth. And the international frameworks at the moment who are sort of mapping the destruction of nature. So scientists are louder and louder saying that we are in a 6th mass extinction of species at the moment. And the last one was 65 million years ago. So that's long before humans were even thought about, when the dinosaurs left. And now this mass extinction is our fault. And so these frameworks, like the Convention on Biodiversity, for example, and the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Ecosystems, they are saying that we need a societal transformation. So that's not just any change. It's a total reorganization of our systems. And how do we do that? And I think that culture is actually our operating system. And we don't reflect on that so much until it's challenged. And now, in this time of transition, it is being challenged. So why are we where we are? Why are we destructive on a level that threatens, civilizations and the human species and also life on Earth? And then we need to think about what happened with that cultural assumption of dominance and control and separation. When that got fueled by the very powerful energy that we found in fossil fuels, it really took off. And that's what happened during the second half of the 20th century, and with the result that here we are today in an ecological crisis. And I think so. There are many ways to understand that, but one way is that I think from last year, the mass of human structures, stuff basically, is now larger than the entire biosphere. So our buildings, roads, bridges, things they weigh more than all of the animals, all of the plants, all of the living things. And that's just, I find it mind-blowing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, and if we talk a little bit about the climate crisis, many people, of course, they realize that we need to stop using fossil fuels. And we see the devastation and that is causing the planet and beyond. One of the problems when it comes to people's lack of understanding for our dependence on nature and the devastation we cause with our overconsumption and way of life has to do with urbanization. So I thought we could, elaborate a little bit on that because people in megacities and large communities, they really rarely get in touch with nature. So, and they don't get the deeper understanding of the importance nature is for us. So how do we go about to change that? We talked a little bit about ecocide, but in a more general term, how do you see we can, bridge that gap, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. We could have a conversation on just that question. There are many, many answers to that, and one is that I think we need new institutions like laws, for example, that make our systems aware that we are a part of nature. But it's also about how we create a personal understanding around nature. And my favorite idea, like when people say, oh, so if you could do just one thing, what would you do? Then I used to say, I want to say two things. One is ecocide as an international crime, and the other one is to have a garden in every school. Because I think that's just totally a very obvious thing that kids need to be out. They need to be connecting with nature and with living beings, and they need to understand that every day, every breath you take, every meal you eat, you are a part of a living whole that is much larger than you will ever understand. So you have to, you have to be aware of that. And I think we have to be aware of it as individuals and as a society. And there are many ways to create that awareness, but one thing that would be so simple and so cheap and so also important for the well-being of kids and people is to just have a garden. And that's also an ancient understanding. I mean, the paradise is actually a garden. So, yeah.
And people who are interested in your work, I mean, how do you work with the End Ecocide movement, so to speak? And how do you work to develop laws for the protection of nature? And for people interested to get involved and spread this idea, how can they do so?
So what we are mainly doing is to, and this is what I would also like people to do, is to create awareness that this possibility exists to have ecocide as an international crime. It's quite easy to do, actually, because the institutions are already there, the frameworks are already there. We have already thought that this was a good idea. We just have to do it. And so what we are doing is to create awareness around that, and that's actually quite fun work because it's so hopeful, because people know that we can't continue like we are and they don't see any solutions, and this is actually one very feasible and also powerful and possible thing. So it creates a lot of energy and hope. And at the moment in End Ecocide Sweden, we are working to, I would say, we are working towards the Stockholm Plus 50 conference. So next year in June 22, there will be the next UN conference on sustainable development in Stockholm to celebrate the first UN conference on the environment in 72. And we think that Ecocide Law needs to be on the agenda there. So we are working towards the Swedish government, whatever that is nowadays, I don't know. And we are also working on 2 international platforms. One is to create support around business. So for business leaders to be behind Ecocide Law, which is maybe seems weird, but it's not, because for most businesses this would be a really good idea, since it would level out the playing field, saying that, okay, we don't want to have competition where some actors can make profit by destroying ecosystems. We need that to be illegal for all. And business usually like really, long-term rules that holds everyone accountable, and more long-term rules than international criminal law is, you don't get that. So that's one of the platforms, and we work through, we call it Ecocide Law Alliance. So if you are involved in business contexts, please look that up. And the other one that we are working on is faith for Ecocide Law. So gathering actually the world's religions for the protection and reverence for creation, or Mother Earth, or whatever you will call it. And that's actually, I think that's one of the beauties with this idea, is to say that, okay, I mean, we can disagree on a lot of things as people. We can disagree what God is called, for example, but we could actually agree that we all need nature and that we all have to protect nature. So let's do that. And so if you're involved in faith communities, please look that up. face for Ecocide Law.
Yeah, sounds really interesting. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, if you can unite people under the same umbrella with the same cause, I mean, why not? The more, the merrier, the better to change this. So I think that's a great idea. But just on your personal note then, I mean, if people are wondering, some people think like, yeah, she's talking a lot, but what is she doing herself? So I should throw it in as just a fun anecdote. But how have your knowledge and drive to protect nature, which you have been working on for so long now, how has it been affecting your personal life? Could you tell us a little bit? I read that you're living in a smaller community on the island of Ingarö outside Stockholm, and you have your own pigs, which is rare nowadays. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit what you're doing in your own life.
I have to reveal though that the pigs are now in the freezer.
Okay.
But we do have still sheep.
Yeah.
What do I do in my own life? I can give you a list. I do have solar panels and I do have a compost toilet, and I try to I try to align my life and my needs with the living systems where I live, so that I can have a very tight circulation of things that I need and things that I leave from myself. And we have a little transition group here at Ingarö where I live as well, and we have a garden together and grow vegetables and
yeah, sounds great. That's fine. I mean, that's perfect. More than most will say, I would say. So that's just fun to hear how because it's interesting when people make use of your knowledge and use it, concretely. It doesn't have to be much, but in your case, it's I think it's great. So, but we're going to dig deeper into the ecocide laws in the second part of this conversation. So we're not finished yet. So stick around. I'll encourage people to stick around for more about ecocide and what we can do to make this transition we all need to do. And so for now, thank you so much, Pella Thiel, for this introduction and conversation.
Thank you.
It was
Johan.
really interesting.
Yeah, it was great. Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Tell us what you think in the comment section below. And if you like the content and you want to support the show, we really appreciate a thumbs up. And consider subscribing. And stick around for the next episode, when I'll be back to talk more with Pella Thiel, focusing on the framework she is developing for what's called the Ecocide Law. And for people interested in sustainable tech, I encourage you to stick around as well, because we have 3 exciting episodes about Tesla and electric vehicles coming up. As always, stay ahead of the curve and stay electric.